Welcome to the Cannabis Compliance Board's webinar on social equity applicant eligibility. In this webinar, we will briefly discuss the establishment of independent cannabis consumption lounges and the establishment of the social equity criteria by the Cannabis Advisory Commission Subcommittee on Social Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. We will then cover how to determine whether you qualify as a social equity candidate and the evidence you will need to provide to support your social equity designation if you are selected. Finally, we'll cover processing fees for social equity applicants. On the CCB's website, you will find links to supplemental worksheets to help track your information, links to tools we use in this workshop, and additional CCB resources. If you are viewing this video on YouTube, links to these resources can be found in the video description below. Before we discuss the criteria, we'd like to give you a brief overview of how the legislation and these criteria were established. In 2021, during the 81st legislative session, the Nevada legislature passed Assembly Bill 341, which allowed for the licensure of cannabis consumption lounges. The bill requires that 50% of all independent lounge licenses in the initial round must be awarded to social equity applicants, which the bill broadly defines as those adversely affected by provisions of previous laws which criminalize activity relating to cannabis. To assist in further interpreting the language in the bill, the Cannabis Advisory Commission, which provides recommendations for the Cannabis Compliance Board, established a subcommittee on social equity, diversity, and inclusion. This subcommittee is comprised of local business owners, advocates, and public figures. The subcommittee met 4 times during the fall of 2021 to establish criteria for social equity applicants. If you'd like to view these public meetings, links can be found on the CCB website under the Public Meetings tab or on the CCB's YouTube channel. In November of 2021, the Cannabis Advisory Commission met and approved the suggestions suggested by the various subcommittees. A link to this meeting can also be found in the video description if you are watching this video on YouTube. Before we go into detail about each qualification, we'd like to give a quick overview of what qualifies as a social equity candidate. First, an applicant or group of applicants which meet the social equity qualifications must have at least 51% ownership in the business. Second, they must have resided in a disproportionately impacted area, or DIA, for the last 5 years. Finally, they must have had a cannabis-related offense. If they do not have a cannabis-related offense, they may also qualify as a social equity applicant if a close family member has a prior cannabis-related offense and lives or has lived in a DIA for at least 5 years. The first factor that determines social equity eligibility is ownership. The applicant, or applicants, must be the majority stakeholder in the independent cannabis consumption lounge. This is strictly limited to ownership and does not include those who hold board member or officer status without any ownership. If multiple owners in a business qualify as social equity applicants, they can combine their percentage of ownership to equal or exceed 51%. Next, applicants must have lived in a disproportionately impacted area, or DIA, for the last 5 years. A DIA is defined as a census tract or tracts that, as of the 2010 census, had an incarceration rate of 3.3% or higher, which would put that tract in the 90th percentile or higher when compared to the rest of the country. The address or addresses must also have an Area Deprivation Index, or ADI score, of 7 or higher on a state decile scale. Remember, for an area to be considered a DIA, it must have a qualifying score in both categories. To determine if your address or addresses meet the DIA criteria, you will utilize 2 tools. First, the Opportunity Atlas is used to determine the incarceration rates of an area. Next, the Neighborhood Atlas is used to find an area's Area Deprivation Index score. In the following slides, we will cover how to keep track of your scores and how to use each tool. The CCB has created worksheets that are designed to assist you in determining your eligibility as a social equity applicant to answer the attestations in the application. The worksheets provided on the CCB website can also provide examples of the types of documents you will need to provide if you're selected. Please note that you will not be required to upload supporting documents at the time you are filling out the application, but we advise preparing your documentation ahead of time in the event that you're selected. To determine whether the address or addresses of a residence are in a DIA, the first tool you'll use is the Opportunity Atlas, which incorporates data from the United States Census, federal income tax returns, and the American Community Survey to measure a person's social mobility based on the neighborhood where they grew up. To access the Opportunity Atlas, visit opportunityatlas.org or find a link on the CCB's Consumption Lounge resource page. If you're viewing this on YouTube, you'll find a link in the description below. Once you've reached opportunityatlas.org, select Begin Exploring on the website's landing page to determine the incarceration rate of a census tract neighborhood. When you arrive on the page, a pop-up will appear that shows you how to use the tool. You can click OK to move on to the next steps. Before you look up the address, you'll need to adjust some settings to the tool to ensure that you receive accurate results. First, in the top right corner, you'll find a drop-down menu. Select Incarceration Rate. You can also select the option on the left-hand side. Incarceration rate should be the second option in either menu. Also in the upper right-hand side, you'll select the distribution rate. Select All for parent income, child race, and child gender. We want to rate these tracts nationally, so in the comparison tool in the right corner, select Everyone. Now that you've set the parameters, you'll enter your address in the left-hand toolbar. Be sure to include the city and state. For this demonstration, we'll only be adding a zip code so as not to identify a specific address. Keep in mind there may be multiple census tracts in each zip code, so you should use the exact address in your search to ensure that your correct census tract is highlighted. As you can see here, by only using the zip code, a random tract within that zip code is highlighted. The tool will then outline your census tract and give you the incarceration rate. To qualify, your census block must have a rate of 3.3% or higher. You can also hover your mouse over the score on the left-hand side to see the tract's percentile. If you'd like a closer look at the area, you can zoom in by using the plus or minus buttons in the bottom right-hand corner or zoom in using your mouse. If you'd like to look up additional addresses, enter the new address in the upper left-hand corner. Be sure to keep track of your score using the Social Equity Eligibility Worksheet. Once you've identified incarceration rates of the address or addresses you're using to determine your DIA, next you'll want to find where your neighborhood falls on the Area Deprivation Index, or ADI. Visit the Neighborhood Atlas at neighborhoodatlas.medicine.wisc.edu, or you can find a link on the CCB's Consumption Lounge resource page. If you're viewing this on YouTube, you'll find a link in the description below. Once you've reached the Neighborhood Atlas, click Mapping to start searching for your neighborhood's ADI score. Use the drop-down to select the state you reside in or resided in. For your ADI score, you will be using the state-only deciles, so you'll want to make sure that that is the option selected on the right-hand side. Next, enter your address at the bottom of the search box. Like the Opportunity Atlas, you'll also need to include the city and state. For this demonstration, we'll only be using the city, state, and zip code as to not identify a specific address. A bubble should appear that shows your state-only decile score. To get a closer look, click the Zoom to Marker at the bottom of the menu. For your area to qualify, your state-only decile score must be a 7 or higher. Remember that you will need to provide a piece of evidence for each year that you resided in a DIA. As a reminder, you will not be required to upload supporting documentation during the application process. Evidence is only required if you are selected to move on to the next step in the process. Examples of evidence could include a receipt for rent or a lease, a record from a public utility, a stub from an employment check, a tax record, or a notarized statement from an owner stating that the applicant lived at the residence located in a DIA. This is not an exhaustive list. We have included more examples of evidence you can provide on the Social Equity Eligibility Worksheet, which is linked on the CCB website and in the video description. Now that we've covered ownership and residency, we'll move on to the cannabis offense portion. To qualify as a social equity applicant, the applicant must have been convicted of a nonviolent felony and/or misdemeanor cannabis offense. Please be advised that if an applicant has 2 or more felonies or a Category A felony, as defined by Nevada Revised Statute 678B.050, they are ineligible to apply. To learn more about these excluded felonies, a link to the NRS can be found in the YouTube video description or on the Laws and Regulations page on the CCB website. If you do not have a conviction, you may also qualify for social equity status if a close family member, which includes a parent, sibling, or child, was convicted of a felony cannabis offense and they live or have lived in a DIA. If your application is selected for a prospective license, you must provide proof of you or your family member's conviction. This proof should be in the form of a certified copy of the judgment of conviction, and you may also qualify for social equity status if a close family member, which includes a parent, sibling, or child, was convicted of a felony cannabis offense and they live or have lived in a DIA. Discussed in this workshop. Remember, you must meet all ownership, DIA residency, and cannabis conviction requirements. During the application process, you'll have to enter all the owners of your business, their ownership percentage, and indicate whether or not each owner is a social equity applicant. For the DIA and conviction requirements, you will not have to submit proof during the application process. Finally, social equity applicants are eligible for a discounted processing fee. All social equity applicants pay only $2,500 or 25% of the $10,000 processing fee. In addition to this webinar, the CCB also offers a variety of educational webinars, worksheets, and application checklists. To access these materials and learn more about the CCB, visit ccb.nv.gov. We also have a frequently asked questions page to help answer any questions you may have. You can also access other educational webinars and view past board meetings or subcommittee meetings on the CCB's YouTube page at youtube.com/c/CCB State of Nevada, all one word. If you have any additional questions that may not have been covered in this webinar, please email ccbconsumptionlounge@ccb.nv.gov.